Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. Every so often, usually in the comments on one of my outdoor expedition videos, I get asked about the gear that I carry. Now, I'm not one of those people who goes out and diligently buys every latest outdoor gadget on the market and puts it through its paces and posts a review of it. I know there's entire YouTube channels built around that kind of thing, but off the top of my head, I couldn't even tell you who they are. So I'm not necessarily your go-to gear guru, but since it's been requested, I figured it wouldn't hurt to go through what I do carry in the field. And interestingly enough, my approach to outdoor survival kits has kind of come full circle over the years. As a kid, I started off not having much survival equipment, maybe a pocket knife and a little compass, and that was probably about it. And so I'd carry it in my pockets. And then as I started to accumulate more gear that might conceivably be applicable to an outdoor survival situation, naturally I had to carry it all with me because as a kid, having survival gear is cool. And so my gear accumulated to the point where it no longer fit in my pockets, and so I had a shoulder bag for it, and then I had 2 shoulder bags for it, or a backpack. And then eventually it got to the point where I realized that it was getting kind of cumbersome and I needed to slim it down, so I went through and selected out what I thought would actually be a sensible survival kit that fit in one shoulder bag. And for quite a number of years, I keep my survival kit in this shoulder bag, which in turn I would keep in my truck, so I always had it available when I was, going off on an expedition or just parking somewhere to go off hiking. In theory, I was supposed to grab the shoulder bag and take my survival kit anytime I left the truck in, the wilderness. That didn't always work out that way, because sometimes I would, park the truck and think I was just gonna walk 100 feet this direction and look around, and then I'd see something, 100 feet further on that I wanted to go look at, and pretty soon I'd be on a half-day hike and, not have any of my gear, but thankfully that never proved to be too much of an issue. Anyway, after keeping that shoulder bag survival kit in the truck for 10 years or so, I went through it and kind of threw out all the things that I hadn't used in that 10-year period, and that allowed me to slim it down to a set of gear that I could actually carry in my pockets again. Now, albeit in a tactical style vest that has a lot of pockets, but still I'm down now to a survival kit that pretty much fits in the pockets of the clothing that I wear every day, and so it doesn't get left in the truck. So, what have I got in my pockets, or on my person, in the way of survival equipment? Well, starting at the top, I've got a broad-brimmed hat. I consider this to be an indispensable piece of survival equipment, because the few occasions when I've forgotten my hat have instilled in me a deep appreciation for just how much difference that little circle of shade around your head makes in terms of the physiological stresses that are placed on your body by being out in the sun all day. Second, you'll notice that this hat has a chin strap. That's also an important piece of survival gear if you want to keep your hat on your head when it gets windy out. Some hats come with chin straps, others don't. This one didn't, but I punched a couple of holes in the brim, right close to the crown, and grommeted them, and then ran a piece of paracord through them so I could make this improvised chin strap, and this works pretty well. Let's see, next thing down, I've got a couple of pens. These come in handy around the office and in the shop. If I'm going on a hike, I'll actually typically take these out and leave them in the truck because I've rarely found any need for a pen beyond the end of the road. And if I'm wearing, shoulder bags or other gear with straps that cross my chest, the straps bearing on the pens and driving them into my chest can cause a little bit of discomfort. Let's see. In this pocket, I have a lighter, just a cheap disposable lighter. I have actually a video on reviewing a series of different kinds of lighters, so if you want to know why I carry this one as opposed to something fancier, that video provides a comprehensive answer to that question. Another lanyard. This one attaches to the chin strap of my hat, like so, and then I can clip it onto a ring on my vest. That provides a second check, if you will, in case a really strong gust of wind happens to catch my hat from the rear and flip it off despite the chin strap, which I have had happen. In case you didn't know, it can get pretty windy in Idaho. Let's see, also in this pocket I have a compact knife sharpener. Don't find that I need this very often. I tend to keep my knives pretty sharp around the house, and then rarely do they get dull in the field. But if you happen to be skinning an animal or something and your knife gets dull in the middle of the process, a compact knife sharpener can be an indispensable piece of equipment. Let's see, in this pocket I've got some Band-Aids and a roll of bandaging tape. And that's really about the extent of the first aid component of my survival kit. I've heard of people carrying things like suturing kits or certain kinds of medications. I don't have the medical training to know what to do with those kinds of things, and so there wouldn't really be any point to me carrying them. If you have that medical training, great, but my approach to first aid pretty much has been that if I get hurt, I wash off the wound as best I can, bandage it up as best I can, and then tough it out and let it heal. Or if it's really bad, maybe go to a doctor. Thankfully, I've never had an injury that serious in the backcountry. Also in this pocket, I have a tin of earplugs. Holds about 3 pair of ordinary disposable earplugs. Actually, this was a container of percussion caps before I used up the percussion caps and repurposed it as an earplug container. But earplugs come in really handy, whether I'm in the shop running equipment that's noisy, or outside running a backhoe, or out at the range doing some shooting, or even just, out hiking on a really windy day. I find that putting earplugs in can attenuate the wind noise of the air rushing around your head and actually reduce the exposure stress of being in a really windy environment, pretty significantly. So earplugs are just a handy thing to have, regardless of where you are. In this pocket, I have some strips of tar paper in a plastic bag and a little coil of heavy gauge copper wire. This was probably a leftover ground wire from when I did the electrical wiring in my shop. But anyway, the tar paper is a fire starter. It burns really well. It's pretty much completely waterproof. In most cases, this is all I would need, in addition to my lighter, to get a fire going in adverse conditions. So, good thing to have if you ever need to build a survival fire. As for the copper wire, this comes in really handy anytime you have to troubleshoot an engine that won't start when you're parked at a remote trailhead and wanting to go home. Mostly I've used this for making connections. Backing up a little bit, I've driven a number of older Ford trucks, and one thing that commonly goes out on those vehicles is the starter solenoid. So if you have an occasion where the solenoid goes bad and you're a long way from an auto parts store, you can short across the solenoid and start the vehicle using a piece of copper wire. I've had to do that to my truck on a number of occasions. Seems like I once had to fish my keys out of something with this wire too at one point. I forget exactly where I dropped them that I had to do that. But, again, the wire comes in handy for any number of applications, both mechanical and electrical. In this pocket, I've got a flashlight, a couple of spare batteries, and a wad of string, or rather paracord. The batteries obviously are for the flashlight and also for a GPS that we'll talk about in a minute. The string comes in handy for any number of things, whether it's hanging up a small game animal that I want to dress, or just tying up a coat that I want to lash behind my saddle or tie to my pack, or whatever the case may be. So lots of miscellaneous uses for string that you can find in the great outdoors. As to the flashlight, this is specifically a ThruNite TN12. I did do a flashlight review video if you want more details on this and how it compares to some of the other flashlights on the market. What I will say here about the TN12 specifically is that I really like the range of brightness settings that it affords, because they each have their own unique purpose. Actually, let's go through those brightness settings and I'll explain what I mean. The very lowest brightness setting is, I think it's like 1/3 of a lumen. Very little light, but in total darkness, it's enough to see maybe a few feet in front of you, and it's enough to do some reading in a dark environment. And on this setting, the flashlight battery will last almost indefinitely. I forget what the specs are. Look at my flashlight review video if you want to check that out. But it will burn, or run, I should say, for a very long time on this low brightness setting. And if you were ever, say, trapped in a mine shaft, or went exploring in a cave and lost your way, anywhere where you were trapped in total darkness for a while and just had to wait for rescuers to find you, this could literally save your sanity. I've known, well, I haven't known them personally, but I've known of people who literally went crazy from being trapped in total darkness for a couple of days. The ability to, if necessary, read for several days, without any external source of light, or just have some light to see by in, an emergency that plunged you into total darkness, I think is an important feature for a survival type flashlight. Okay, turning it up to the next setting, I think that's about 10 lumens. Again, if you want the exact specs, look at my flashlight review video, because it's been a while since I did that and I don't remember the specific numbers off the top of my head. But anyway, second brightness setting is, about right for general purpose reading or inspecting small parts, looking in things where a higher brightness setting would blind you. I really don't like trying to read with anything brighter than about 10 lumens, because shining that on a white page, a foot in front of my face, is blinding. If you're trying to read with a 100+ lumen flashlight, your best bet usually is to shine it over your shoulder or up at the ceiling if you're inside, and let the reflected light, reflect off the page. But anyway, so 10 lumens, again, useful for reading and general purpose applications where you don't want too much light too close to your face. Third setting, I think it's about 250 lumens, and this is just about right for walking around in the dark. When you're outside trying to find your way, you want to see, what's on the ground in front of you, and also kind of what's further out in front of you. 250 lumens is just about right. You get much less than that, much less than about 200, and the darkness starts to encroach on you. You can't see where you're going as much. You get too much more than that, and yeah, it looks brighter, but you can't really see any further, so it doesn't really help you, and it reduces your battery life. However, the exception to that is if you're looking through a rifle scope, and so the next setting up is 750 lumens, and that comes in really handy if I have to cradle my flashlight next to the scope of my rifle to shoot a rabbit in the dark. Or anything else if I had to shoot something else in the dark, I guess. So, that setting does have its use. The only one that I don't use at all is the absolute highest setting, which they pretty clearly included just so that they could advertise this as a 1,000+ lumen flashlight, because if you read the manual, they actually tell you not to run it on the highest setting for more than 10 minutes, I think, to avoid damaging the LED. So I avoid running it on the highest setting at all for that purpose, but really the others do what I need them to do. As such, the ThruNite TN12 is a very versatile flashlight, and that's why I choose to carry that particular model. Let's see, in this pocket I've got just some loose raw oats. These come in really handy for making friends with horses and mules and maybe certain other animals. I figure if my horses know that I always have a pocket full of oats, then anytime they see me, they're gonna come up and nuzzle on me and beg for oats, and that makes it very easy for me to get a halter on them when I want to take them riding. Or, if they get out and I'm trying to catch them, trying to bring them back, same thing. It makes it easier to approach them and get them haltered. Or if I'm trying to catch, a horse for somebody else, help somebody else catch a horse that's on the loose. If you spend much time around livestock that like oats, having some oats with you can come in handy. Let's see. Handkerchief, hopefully self-explanatory. Much more convenient than trying to carry disposable Kleenexes when you're 75 miles from the nearest wastebasket. Compass. Doesn't really get used very much, but could really come in handy if I got lost in the fog and the battery on my GPS died and I had to find my way home. Also, not very big, doesn't weigh very much, easy to carry. Pocket saw. This is one of the heavier items that I carry in my pockets, and so at one point I considered dispensing with it, but it turns out that having a way to cut through tree limbs or other wooden obstacles really is an important part of your survival kit. One occasion in particular, just after I had kind of debated whether or not to bring the saw, unfortunately had it on me. We were floating a river and came up on a log jam and had to portage the boat around the log jam and had to cut our way through a thicket of bushes, and if I hadn't had this, we might have been stuck there for days. So, I do carry a pocket saw, even though it is a little bit heavier than I might like. Now, I'm not real satisfied with the selection of pocket saws on the market. The wire saws, granted they're smaller and lighter, but they're also really flimsy. So I wouldn't carry one of those. The so-called saber saws that they make out of chainsaw blade are real sturdy, but they don't cut very fast. They don't work very well. And the reason for that, of course, is that they're made out of a chainsaw blade, which is designed for a very different application. The small gas engines that are used to run chainsaws run very efficiently at high RPM and very low torque. So to run a chainsaw or to make a chainsaw blade, you need a tooth design that shaves off just a little sliver of wood on every pass so that you don't generate enough counter torque to bog down the engine. And you can run it at high RPMs, and when the blade is running, that fast, then all those little slivers really add up and you can cut through some wood pretty fast with a chainsaw. When you're trying to run it by hand, you can't run it that fast, and so those little slivers don't add up very fast, and it ends up being a saw that cuts very slowly. You know, you look at most hand saws, especially like your traditional, lumberjack crosscut saws, and they have an extremely aggressive tooth pattern because when you're manhandling a saw by hand, you can put a lot of force on it and make a very heavy cut if if your tooth style supports that, but you're probably not going to be sawing it back and forth all that quickly. So, like I said, so the wire saws don't really work. The pocket chainsaws or the saber saws, the ones that are made from actual chainsaw blade, don't really work. The only one I've found that's kind of in the middle is what they call the pocket chainsaw, but when I got it, it didn't come pre-sharpened. The teeth were just like stamped and they were totally blunt. You could run your hand over the thing and it wouldn't even scratch you. So I had to go through and painstakingly manually grind an edge on every single tooth before I could make this thing perform acceptably. And so I wish there was a better saw on the market. Maybe there is and I just don't know about it. But for now, this is what I'm carrying, and it does come in handy even if it was kind of a pain to acquire and sharpen. Of course, a good fixed blade knife is an indispensable piece of survival gear. Of course, a multi-tool or other portable pair of pliers has a million uses. Everything from removing a hook from a fish's mouth to bending a hook on the end of your copper wire so that you can snare your car keys out from where you dropped them. I like the Gerber style of multi-tool because it's easier to deploy with one hand, but whatever particular brand or style you carry, a multi-tool really comes in handy. Of course, I carry my Smith & Wesson 44 Magnum revolver. Now, obviously a person's choice of firearms for EDC is going to vary depending on their lifestyle. Some people, if they need a high level of concealment for the places where they want to carry a gun, and their style of dress is not conducive to concealing a full-sized handgun, may be limited to carrying diminutive pocket pistols. Others perhaps are able to carry a full-sized handgun, but their concern is more for fighting off human assailants, and so they would opt to go with a modern high-capacity semi-automatic that gives them as much firepower as possible for that application. In my case, where given my lifestyle and my backcountry expeditions, chances are that if I ever have to defend myself, it's most likely going to be against a grizzly bear or a gray wolf or some other dangerous wild animal. I need a little bit more stopping power than maybe your typical automatic. In fact, 44 Magnum is really on the light side for taking out a large, dangerous animal. You certainly would not choose a 44 Magnum revolver for hunting dangerous game. However, this represents about the most firepower, or the most stopping power, I should say, that I can get in a package that is still small enough and light enough to realistically carry around all day, and that still remains controllable. There are bigger guns in bigger calibers that present, more stopping power and are still controllable, but they're too big to realistically carry around as an EDC gun. There's guns that maybe are smaller and lighter than this and still chambered for 44 Magnum, but I wouldn't be able to shoot them and control them effectively, so there's no point carrying them. And of course there's smaller guns that might be easier to carry, but don't have as much power as this does. So, you know, all things considered, I feel like the Smith & Wesson 44 Magnum gives me the best chance of being able to fight off a dangerous animal should the need to do so ever arise. So that about does it for my true EDC gear, the stuff that I carry around daily, whether I'm, you know, headed out to the backcountry or not. You know, aside from things like car keys and a wallet that I don't really need to talk about as far as EDC gear is concerned. But there are a few additional items that I would pick up in addition to what I've shown you if I am headed out for a day hike or other backcountry expedition. Of course, if I'm going to be out for more than half a day or so, I'm going to bring a lunch or, you know, food provisions as necessary, depending on the length of the trip. I'm also going to want to bring a water bottle. And for most of my, you know, general day hikes or hiking expeditions, my choice of water bottles is just a 1 liter polyethylene terephthalate soda bottle. This one I think was originally a bottle of ginger ale, but once it's been emptied of its initial contents, it can be refilled with water. And the thing I love about these is they're actually watertight. You know, unlike most of the water bottles that you'll find in sporting goods stores, you can fill this with water, screw the cap on, throw it in your backpack sideways, upside down, shake it up, shake the pack up, you know, throw the pack in the back of your truck and drive over a bumpy road. It doesn't leak. You know, a lot of water bottles that are supposedly designed for backcountry expeditions are not as watertight as an ordinary soda bottle. These are also pretty tough. You know, they're designed to withstand quite a bit of pressure from the carbonation in the soda, you know, so that the soda doesn't go flat while it's waiting for someone to come along and buy it in the grocery store. So they're fairly durable, and when they do eventually wear out, they're extremely inexpensive to replace, especially if you should happen to drink a couple bottles of soda in the course of a year. So that's my choice of water bottles. A lot of times if I'm taking it on a hike, I'll just tie a piece of rope around the neck here so I can wear it kind of like a shoulder bag or a canteen, and that seems to work pretty well. Another thing that I often carry in the backcountry, especially if I'm exploring new terrain, is a compact electronic GPS unit. The GPS that I've got is a Garmin eTrex 20. Overall, I've been pretty satisfied with this GPS. Kind of my one gripe about it is that originally it came with this belt clip unit that wasn't real secure. One time I was coming back from a hike and going fairly fast down a slope when the clip failed, basically, or sort of came loose, and the GPS fell just as I was taking a step forward, so I ended up inadvertently kicking it down the slope, and that kind of scuffed up the screen where it skittered along some rocks before it came to a stop. I attempted to repair the scratches on the screen by taking a piece of clear packaging tape and applying it over the screen, and then sort of gently heating and pressing on it and trying to smooth it out until it sort of filled in all the scratches. And it more or less worked. I mean, it's continued to serve me reasonably well for several years since that happened. But of course, in the aftermath of that, I also took off the belt clip and replaced it with a lanyard. So now I just hook this lanyard around this loop in my vest, and then I'll stick this in one of my pockets or something while I'm out in the woods. And then if I should happen to drop it, or if it falls out of my pocket, it's still caught on the lanyard and I don't end up kicking it down the slope again. But as far as its performance, the functionality of the GPS, like I say, it's been real reliable. Much more so, incidentally, than some of Garmin's other models. My dad had, I want to say it was an eTrex 30. It was basically just their next model up of GPS unit. And there was one excursion in particular where I remember the first day of the trip, we hiked up to a mountain lake, and it seemed like in the morning, Dad had a weak signal about half the time on his GPS, and the other half the time he didn't have any signal at all, and by about lunchtime, the battery was dead. Whereas mine, starting out with a fresh battery just like he did, my battery lasted upwards of 2 days of continuous use, and I had a strong signal the whole time that we were out. So, like I said, I've had good results with the eTrex 20. I'm not sure about some of Garmin's other models. As you can surely infer from the outdoor slideshow type videos that I've posted, I also oftentimes carry a camera when I'm out exploring the out-of-doors. The camera that I carry is a Pentax Optio W80. I actually got given this camera, so I wasn't really involved in the selection process. I don't know if there's other better cameras out there, but this one is nice and compact and seems to take reasonably good pictures. You can judge the quality of my pictures for yourself if you watch my slideshow type outdoor adventure videos. That's not really a piece of survival equipment, but that is a piece of gear that I often carry. Specifically on winter excursions, I will also bring sunglasses along. I don't usually tend to do anything with sunglasses in the summertime. I find that the shade of my hat really is good enough. But in the wintertime, especially in sort of the late winter, from about the beginning of February up until the thaw, when the sunlight is a little more direct and a little bit more intense, the snow gets really bright, to the point where without sunglasses it's almost painful to look around on a sunny day. So for winter expeditions, I would consider some sort of UV blocking sunglasses to be an indispensable piece of survival equipment. Summertime, not so much. I think that's about it for gear that I actually carry on my person. There are a few additional things that I would keep in my truck. Most of those either are redundant with stuff that I carry on my person, just nice to have a spare in case one breaks, or they're related to, maintenance of the vehicle itself, things like, spare tire, lug wrench, jack. Spare lug nuts actually are a good idea. I've occasionally had a wheel come off while driving, and when that happens, usually you can find the wheel again, but finding the lug nuts is a challenge. So if you've got some spare lug nuts, that makes it a lot easier to put your wheel back on. Other than that, there are still a couple of items that are good to keep in the truck. One would be a supply of rope. That comes in handy both for everyday use, securing loads, and it also comes in really handy if I have to get someone to pull me out of the mud because I got stuck, or if I find somebody else who got stuck in the mud and I have to pull them out. It's a good idea to keep an abundance of rope in the truck. And, by the same token, having, a few tarps or blankets and stuff like that, just a good idea, stuff to keep in the car. Another thing that I would consider an indispensable piece of vehicular EDC gear is a shovel. I cannot tell you how many times I have been stuck in the mud or in the snow and had to dig my way out. Actually, in the wintertime, I carry two shovels, a regular shovel and a snow shovel for that purpose. So, that's a good piece of equipment to have for sure. And actually, one time, I got the truck stuck so bad it took me several days to dig out. And that happened on the first day of a week-long camping trip. So as it happened, I had all of the gear I needed to spend several days there, and it wasn't too bad other than the fact that it took me half of my camping trip to get my truck unstuck. But that got me thinking that it could have been bad if I hadn't had any food along, because, you burn a lot of calories when you're trying to dig your truck out of the mud. Anyway, so since then, I've taken to keeping an emergency food supply in the truck as well, enough to last me a few days if something like that ever happened again on an occasion when I wasn't already planning to go camping. For that matter, especially during the summer, I leave a lot of my camping gear in the truck, and that simplifies packing for camping trips, but a lot of it could also come in handy if I suddenly found myself on an unplanned camping trip because something went wrong and the truck won't take me home. But anyway, that's about all I can think of as far as my approach to EDC. So until next time, thank you for watching the Idahoan Show.